the one thing that I think has translated well, regardless of where you have learned from, regardless of where you have started from, is hard work. 100% of the time.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
I told them that episode 16 we'd have me starring as the metronome for this week's podcast. It's audio career options with me, Metronome Joe. And we have over here, I'm pointing to Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben.
Now I'm pointing to Brian.
What's up? I'm Bryant.
And we are the Guys with No Lives, or GWNL, I Can't Speak Today podcast. Awesome. So again, this week is audio career options. Let's get started with studio. Who wants to take the first swing at studio career options? And we'll just kind of start there and work through. We have a bunch of things on our little list here, and there's even more that we didn't list. So who wants to take us out?
Can we before, like, to premise it, I think
Talk about kind of the different categories that we came up with.
Yeah, in general.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, like, everybody thinks that there's really like 4 like audio and music jobs, you know?
Yeah, but there's like
in
20
existence.
million.
Yeah. And it's there's the front of house engineer and the recording engineer, and maybe that's different than the mix engineer, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's like the music producer.
Producer, yeah.
Right.
You know, and those are really the 3 or 4 kind of things that, and maybe somebody thinks of a mastering engineer,
Right.
you know, and that's the same thing in just the music business in general. Like, there's the artist, there's the band, you know, there's the manager, but there's so many more jobs. And I think one thing I talk about is, like, you think of any major artist, and especially like those big top tier artists, there's like 300 people that legitimately work full time because that artist is doing what they do.
Oh,
Yeah.
Between all the people at the record label and the people on their team and the people on their tour, all the technicians and such, and all the people that organize things, it's like 300 people. So it's not like, oh, this person is just making so much money.
And
They're
it only
providing a
scales up.
livelihood.
And
Yeah,
it only
does.
scales up more because, like, I know that, so, like, U2, when they did their Vertigo World Tour, I think is what it was, I had friends that were stagehands for that, and they were telling me that essentially what happened was not only did they have 3 fleets of trucks, of semi-trucks.
3 full setups. Yeah, I heard about this. Yeah.
56 semis per, like fleet of trucks just to set up their world tour. And what they did was they had one that was setting up in the next venue, one that was still running the current venue, and one that was tearing down from prior venue.
Yeah, and they
And so-
hippity hop, right?
Yeah, and they would just like leapfrog each other throughout the whole thing. And that's not even including, we're talking just stagehands setting up trussing and video wall and speaker systems. Like, we're not even getting into any like mix engineers or any production engineers or anything like that. And that was just for them.
Yeah, because those engineers would be in the actual show,
Right.
all the other setup, all the, you know, and then you got 56 truck drivers too, and
Yeah. Truck drivers. Like, you're literally talking about employing almost 1,000 people, and maybe like 600 or 700 people just to like run that. Well, I honestly at that point though, like
probably close to 1,000 people.
Yeah, just for one band. For one band. Now these are like the like the super famous people that have crazy careers. Not
but
us.
even like any well-known artist, just in general on a regular basis, is going to be at least 300 people that are going to be making their full-time living because of the success of that artist.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and making sure that success continues. It's not like a taking advantage of that success like a lot of people think record labels do. But I just think that to premise it is good, because a lot of people, you know, they see the most apparent jobs.
There's a couple different categories that we came up with.
Yeah.
So we'll branch this out into these different categories. So you've got your studio careers, and then you've got your live sound / event careers, and then your education careers, and your and like retail / sales careers. So those 4 are the ones that we'll touch on today.
You know, and now that I think about it too, like there's even more within those, because like I think about distributors and how they interact with things. Like, you know, like you go to Namm and like you talk about those things.
Yeah, manufacturers. I think that all fits in the retail sales.
Yeah, fair.
But you're right. There is, like, you can build equipment. You know, you can write software.
Well, and then there's like repairs and stuff too for equipment and like anyways.
Yeah.
That's a whole world.
So let's start off with studio careers. Ben, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the main thing is the recording engineer, and that gets broken up into multiple subsets of engineers. So there's, you know, the tracking engineer, recording engineer that's actually recording the instruments, the performances, and then there's a mix engineer that would be mixing the multi-track, and then the mastering engineer that's mastering the stereo mix down. And there's also assistant engineers. Back in the day when you had like a separate tape machine, you had a tape operator, which they'll have a Pro Tools operator, which is a job a lot of times. It doesn't have to necessarily be Pro Tools, but it's still called a Pro Tools operator, which could be done by an assistant engineer as well. And a lot of times the assistant engineers are going and moving things around and setting things up at the beck and call of the main engineer. But those are all the engineers. Then you've got the producers. So there's three main types of producers in the music business that I like to divide it up with. Because like you have producers in the film world too. But the three in the music business is the music producer, and that's the one that, you know, they're actually like an arranger. Like 30 years ago, they would have been called an arranger, not a music producer. But they're actually like composing music and creating like tracks and such. Like maybe they're
so like in this case, like this type of producer, from, if I understand this right, could like get a demo from an artist and then take that kind of like flesh it out. Like they could get like a scratch vocal and scratch guitar, and then take that and be like, okay, yeah, what kind of vibe do you want with this? Oh, you want this to be an EDM production? Cool. I'll remove this acoustic guitar track, and now we've got like lush pads and got these awesome leads and some 808s. And
or it's like a hip hop and rap producer, and they're the person that's making the beat maker, basically.
The beat baker, the one who bakes the beats. They put them fresh from the oven and they put them on the counter.
You good, Joe?
Look, we're too sterile. We have.
I know. Thank you for. Okay, so anyway, that's the music producer, and all these often just get called producer. So the next one I call the record producer. A lot of people don't like that term anymore because we don't make records anymore. But they're basically the person that's like in charge of making sure that the single or the LP, or the EP or the album gets done. And they're usually hired by the record label, but they work with the artist, and they kind of are the go-between between the artist, the engineer, and the record label to make sure the project gets done.
They're essentially a project manager.
Yeah.
They're thinking about timelines. They're thinking about budget. They're thinking about how soon is this going to happen.
But the third one is where they're thinking more about budget and stuff.
Okay.
They're more like the director of the film.
Okay.
And they do have musical say, and they're kind of like the go-between, the artistic go-between between the artist that speaks artistic mumbo-jumbo speak and the engineer that speaks technical speak. They're kind of the go-between. And a lot of engineers are record producers. Right. A lot of the famous engineers are engineer/producer sort of thing. The third one is the executive producer, and they're the ones that are like for the record label, and they sit in the office and they worry about the budgets and the timelines and stuff like that. And they're the ones that are like paying for it, you know. Yeah. And they're really similar to an executive producer like on a movie. It's the same kind of thing. But that one's like not in the studio as much. But those other two are in the studio. And the example I always give, it's like when you watch like Max Martin, he kind of works as both. But a lot of times, especially in like hip hop production, you can see a definite difference between the record producer and the music producer. If you watch the videos, the music producer is like there on a keyboard with the laptop usually, and the record producer is on the couch. making
listening,
calling the shots.
They're like, no, I don't like that. We're gonna have to retract that. We need something better. Like, can you thicken it up a little bit? Yeah.
It's like not. I know we don't like to name drop and whatnot, but I think talking about some names to give a good examples, like it like this kind of sounds like a Rick Rubin type vibe, or like Mutt Lange.
Yeah, Mutt Lange's definitely a record producer, and George Martin. Yeah. He kind of filled the role of both record producer and music producer. I mean, he did the arrangements for the orchestrations for the Beatles and stuff. Yeah. But he was the record producer. He was the one who worked for the record label, and was like you got to make sure the Beatles actually produce an album. And so that was like George.
Which
Martin's
was fine
job.
until Yoko Ono came in.
Now we're going down.
Okay, man.
Shots fired.
Yeah. But anyways, those are the three producers. I guess another thing is the editors. So a lot of times the engineer is the editor, but you do have, like nowadays we have like tuning editors.
Right.
Yeah. There's I was reading some stories of there's like a couple mix engineers. They're not really like A-listers, so to speak, but they're busy enough to the point where they don't want to do any sort of tuning, and any sort of job that they don't want to do, they just outsource.
Yeah.
And so if they get like an artist in, they go over like the project budget and whatnot, and then they're like, okay, cool. So yeah, if you want like some tuning, here's like my guy that I suggest. Do you want me to like send it off to him for some tuning? Or like, yeah, we're tracking live drums, but do you want to quantize those? Cool. We'll send those off to this other guy that he's like my drum guy.
Yeah.
We'll just tune that. And there's some people that will specialize in even not just tuning vocals, but also tuning strings and horns after the fact.
My Grammy certificate, so the album I worked on, I got a Grammy. I was an assistant engineer, and the main thing that I did, Joe's like surprised. Yeah, I have a Grammy certificate.
I don't believe it.
That's cool.
I'm sorry.
I have it like it's not in here; it's in the house. But I need to get the frame thing. And
unless you have 10 Grammys, I don't want to hear it.
But like that album, most of what I did on that album was I tuned cello parts. It was a cellist that did it, and it was a new age cello album. And so not only did I tune cello parts, but I tuned nature. They're like, these birds don't sound in key. Why don't you find out what pitches they're at and make them in key? And so that's what I did. I did all kinds of random. It was the same thing. It was like the things that the mix engineer, and he was the mix engineer and the record producer sort of thing. And all the things he didn't want to do that were like technical based and auto-tuning based sort of thing, he just made me do. So that's my claim to fame, is I got a Grammy certificate for auto-tuning.
That's interesting. Like, I mean, there's a part of me that would like not mind just tuning vocals for like a gig. Like, honestly, like it's not that bad of a gig.
Sometimes it is like the peon sort of job. I talked to this one guy who he worked as an engineer in Nashville, and his job was to come in at the end of the session, like after everybody had left, and he would tune the vocals. All like, session ends at 3 a.m, so he'd come in at 4 and tune the vocals until like, noon or something.
When the regular engineer shows up.
And then the people show up for their session at like 2, and now the vocals are all tuned from the recordings from the night before.
Wow, you're so good, dude. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't even know. It's like 3 a.m. Yeah. They're like probably drunk or something stupid. Like
we did so great last night. Listen how they sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's all kinds of jobs in there.
Kind of like the start of studio careers, people usually start off as like either a runner / like sometimes like intern / runner, where they're basically just like wrapping cables, or it's like, oh, hey, move that mic stand.
Right.
Yeah.
Or hey, go get this artist coffee.
Sorry, I hate to say it, but I almost feel like a lot of engineers would have them clean up afterwards, but maybe not setting up microphones in the beginning, because there's a whole technical side to setting up that if you're an intern or an assistant that's new, they're not going to have you doing that. They'll have you wrap up cables and put stuff away.
Or it's like, hey, get this mic out and on a stand ready for you to place.
That's fair.
And then the engineer will place it, yeah. I did have one time where I called in to clean up. It was a full orchestra, and everybody had like left to go like out to eat after the session, and I was there by myself cleaning up. all the cables. Like, woohoo!
You say that like I don't do that after every gig.
Yeah,
Man.
That's a big session. Those are big sessions too.
Yeah, I know. There's lots. It took me like a couple hours, and then finally they came back, and I'm like wrapped most everything. I'm like, thanks for the help.
Gee, thanks,
But yeah,
guys.
that's how it goes. That was a long time ago. I was a peon then. So I do just want to add that there is the whole audio post-production thing that is studio as well. That's for film and television. And there's a whole load of jobs in there, and different editors for, dialogue editors and sound effects editors and ADR editors and ADR engineers and remixers, which is the same. I mean, re-recording engineers, which is the same thing as mixing engineers. But there's a whole load of jobs in that field, which are all like studio-based jobs too. But it's not about music. So.
And I'm gonna add another one to that. I'm gonna jump onto that. We're also ignoring video games and the massive amount of audio and sound production design jobs within that.
Yeah, and those are really similar to
they're similar, but they're different because there's more programming though. Like that's the other thing too. Like if you're confident in like C+ or C# or whatever, there's a lot of things like that and like how you use effects and stuff. So that's another world. Similar but different because of the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
All right, can I talk about live sound?
Yeah, Joe, do you want to take a stab at live sound?
Stab. Let's see here. Every day I deal with this at my job because I always explain to them, I was like, you realize you hired one person to do literally 10 people's jobs, right? And they're like, no, we didn't realize that. I'm like, gee, thanks. Okay, so in live sound, you will most likely start out as a drunk guy after a bar gig who is the only person there, and you're probably drunk, and next thing you know, you're winding cables and helping somebody push a cart. I'm kidding. So stagehanding is kind of like your entry level position into a lot of like live sound gigs. You're going to be winding cables, moving heavy objects from point A to point B, moving cases. Maybe once they trust you not to do something completely, utterly stupid, then you might help them fly PA, maybe. Then you might help them actually like do power. But those are things that are relatively unsafe, and they're not going to throw a brand new guy in. You'll be probably working for 3 to 6 months unless you already know what you're doing. But at that point, you're not an entry-level person. But that's stagehanding in general.
I mean, even if you have prior experience, if you go to a new area, if you're working for a new company, you have to get your name out there, and so you're going to start as a stagehand.
Unless they know you, or unless they know your prior companies and those other things, or they see your resume and they see how much experience you have.
Yeah,
in
that's.
Things.
I mean, that's the way it worked out for me here. Like I was able to skip that. Like I was able to get hooked up with some sound companies here, and because they could see that I had experience, and I was training all these students that went there that worked for them. They were like, I was able to jump past the stagehand thing. Yeah. So that was nice.
But that's your entry level position. That's like interning in the audio live sound world, and I say interning in the sense like unpaid interns. Like if you want to get a job at a company, learn how to wind cables, and they will take you.
That is the most.
You can get paid $20 an hour just to wind cables.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. And you know what? I always, and this has worked many times. I've had students. I say, go to a club or wherever there's live music,
bar, club, whatever.
Yeah. And when it's over, hang around, and when they start cleaning up, go up and ask if you can just help wind cables for free. And if you show that you know how to wind decently well, half the time they will let you help out. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they won't.
It just depends on who it is. Now, the other thing is learn how to wind cables properly, because there's a lot. If you go over the elbow and that's wrong.
That's just like, start doing that, Joe. Lift your arm up there, and I'll just
just like this. This is so wrong.
I did have a gig.
Millions of dollars lost because
it
of
was
that sound.
it was with students and stuff, and I had student workers, student helpers, and one student tried to start winding the cable like that, and I was like across the stage. I'm like, stop, like get away. Pick up speakers, do something else.
Yeah.
I totally embarrassed him because I stopped him. I'm like, I saw that. Don't even think about putting your arm up like that.
Don't you ever do that again on my stage.
But that is the most important skill. And I had a student that I taught how to wind cables, and he messaged me when he came back from a job interview, and he said, thanks for teaching me how to wind cables because I just got a job because I could wind cables. And he said as soon as he started winding it properly, they said, you're hired.
Yeah.
So
there you go. So that's kind of your entry level positions. From here, it gets a lot more complicated. And then, so like with that, you'll usually have some type of stage crew manager who just handles people who are moving things on the stage. This is not somebody who's necessarily, they might understand a lot of the technical things like how to set up and like run trussing. They might even understand things like lighting and stuff like that at a kind of, maybe even a more complicated level. Or they might even understand a lot of power things and a lot of things with like flying and rigging. That's another major thing. But those jobs are also specialized jobs. Like a rigger is somebody who just flies things.
You'll even have an uprigger and a downrigger.
Yeah, and they have their own unions and they have their own like qualifications, like certifications and stuff.
Yeah,
because that's dangerous.
Rigging.
Yeah, it is.
Oh yeah. There's rigging and electronics and like even like stage engineers and stage electricians is a gig, like just being stage electrician. I have a buddy, you guys both know him because we used to work with him a bunch of time, but he basically gets paid now to work corporate gigs. And he was telling me this. He's like, he shows up to the gig, they've already plugged everything in, and he just looks at the power boxes, like the 200 amp circuits, and he's like, you need to move that to there, but other than that, you're good. And then he just chills for 8 hours as like a backup call, and he gets paid $40 an hour or more, depending on the gig and what corporate event he's doing.
Yeah.
And that's his job. He just looks at electronics and he knows power, and that's what he gets paid for. He developed a lot of relationships to get to that point, and he had a lot of certifications. But yeah, stage electrician, flyer, rigger, and then you have like just systems technicians. And within systems technicians, so this isn't even mixing. We're not even into mixing yet. Like we're not even into any of those mixing positions. So systems engineers, they come in two and more flavors. You have amp and speaker systems engineers that their whole job is flying, rigging, and like tuning systems. And when you get to the high end of that, like Ben was talking about how like engineers will farm out jobs they don't want to do to other people. Most like system tuners, most systems engineers are just tuning PA. They're showing up with their laptop. They're showing up with a smart rig, or I can't remember the other systems that they have, but smart, SMAART. It's a way of analysis, and it's just frequency analysis. And so they'll show up with their rig. They have their microphones. Some of them are wireless if they're really Gucci gear, and they'll set up and they'll test and they'll see how the room sounds, and then they'll tune it using those tools. So that the sound system sounds good, so that the mix engineer, the front of house engineer, can show up and just mix. You know, and so you have that, right? And you have like a main PA systems engineer, and then you also have a wireless like systems engineer, and their whole job is to maintain wireless systems. And I was working a gig last summer where I actually talked to him about it because I was curious. I was like, so how many channels of wireless are you managing for this event? He's like 63. 63 channels. I mean, at that point, it's a full-time job, and he's managing. Now, he did do some stagehanding on the side, but essentially he had this tent that was just wireless systems. And he was managing all of the antennas across the whole stadium. It was a big deal, and that was his thing, and that was his shtick. That was his job, was just wireless systems.
Well, with any sort of like a big festival, like kind of like Van's Warped Tour, they had to do that because there were so many stages they were running that they had to allocate. They had to like literally coordinate frequencies between stages.
Yeah, because you have interference. And it's not just, there's wireless microphones, but that there's all in-ear monitors.
Well, and let's not even, those are just the things that we're bringing to that venue. Let's also take into account like TV signals, and emergency response signals, all of that stuff. If you're near military installations, you're going to get those kinds of communications that will just step all over your wireless frequencies. So there are a lot of people, and again, part of being a systems engineer, you even have assistants that go and they might go scan with like RF explorers or just other things before you even go to that venue 2 or 3 weeks in advance, and then like do all the stuff for them. And they just do that so that the wireless guy can go there and do things. Anyways, so that's systems engineering, and like these are just system setup. We're not getting into things like, like stage designers and other things for like, bigger concerts and stuff like that. Lighting designers is not really audio related, but it's still kind of audio adjacent, especially if you're running like, DJ, especially if you're working gigs with DJs, they might be running like SMPTE signal for like communications for like video relays. And like, video, and you'll be sending audio to newscasters and stuff like that, and how do they interface with your system. So there's a lot of things like that. And then we get to things that are actually mixing related and like mixing adjacent, which is things like front of house technician or front of house engineers, and then monitors and monitor technicians. Usually a monitors engineer is going to have like an assistant or two, depending on how big of a venue, big of an event. You'll have a front of house engineer who's probably got an A2, an assistant that's assisting him just with front of house things, and like he might be taking notes, he might just be chilling and listening to the music with him, or he might be the one mixing with the A1 just watching him mix. It depends. Different organizations, different companies do things differently. And within that, those roles change if you're going from just doing live sound and live music to things like corporate events, where you might have backup engineers for engineers in case somebody goes down, because a lot of more money is spent on corporate events, which is funny because most of the time corporate events are just talking heads.
But they will have like crazy video walls and big sound, for the music that's happening, but it's not live music. Sometimes they will have live music, but you're right. And that's what this one friend I have who he does tons and tons of corporate gigs, and he's like, they're just they pay better, and
it's way more like comfortable. Like it's not bad at all. I've worked some corporate gigs in the past, and they're really not bad. They're not as fulfilling though. Most people just refer to them as like soulless gigs because you're not really doing anything special, Like it's not like doing gigs with like big name artists is cool, whereas corporate gigs, it's just like another gig. It's what
every corporate gig feels like the last corporate gig.
The funny thing about doing those talking heads things is like the information you learn. It's like I got all this random information in my head because they're like, how do you know so much about that? I'm like, I was doing the sound for this presentation. It's like TED Talks. Like you end up at this doing sound for this like TED Talk about such and such. And it's like, I had to sit there for like 4 hours as they talked about this stuff for this conference,
Yeah.
But now I know everything that is needed to, that somebody could know about such and such,
I will say one more thing on live sound before we leave it alone. It is common that if you are working with smaller companies, you will wear more hats in the audio world, in the live sound world. Whereas if you're working with a larger company or a larger organization, you're going to be doing more specialized roles.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty common thing. Like the smaller the gig, the more likely you're going to be doing 3 or 4 different people's jobs, and that's okay. Like there's not the same pressure as like a big corporate event where things are different.
I think that's a big concept for all of these. Like in the studio, it's the same way. You're going to wear lots of hats, and like I was saying with the music producer and the record producer and the engineer and the tuning, and the mix engineer and the master. You could, especially like here in my studio, I'm doing all the hats a lot of times. And then there's other times where it's a bigger deal and you're like, I'm going to send it off to somebody for mastering. Or I have a producer here with me and I'm the mixing engineer. Or I'm the producer and somebody else is the mix engineer. But yeah, and that's the way they talk about it in the industry, is wearing those different hats. And like the smaller the production is, the more hats you're wearing. The bigger the production is, then you're just usually wearing 1, maybe 2 hats, so you can be.
But there's a lot more pressure on you to be on your game.
On your game for that one hat.
Yeah. The next one that we had was education, but I haven't spoken that much. So we just go to retail and then sort of
retail.
Loop back around.
I know, that's weird.
So then it's like audio and music adjacent. In that, like, you can have like a pretty lucrative career within retail and sales. Like I currently work retail. I'm on the sales. I'm part of like I'm a sales representative for the company that I work for, and basically like my whole job is to make sure I'm staying current on like audio trends and making sure I'm staying current with new audio and music equipment that's coming out, and being informed on that myself. That way, when somebody calls in to speak to an expert about it, they can speak to somebody that has either used it or has researched it enough to be able to answer their questions they may have, so they can like create informed purchasing decisions. And sometimes people will like call in about a particular piece of gear, and it's like, no, what are you trying to do, man? And like I find out that like you think this is going to do this one thing, but I promise you it's not. Like you just need to get an audio interface. Don't get a mixer, man.
That's a common one.
Yeah, that's probably the most common one that I have. And then from there, within like a retail store, you have multiple different positions. You need somebody to manage your sales force, and you need that management to be able to motivate them to want to learn about that kind of stuff. You also have your operations or people working in my case, we've got a big distribution center. There's over 2,000 employees for this company, and maybe 1,000 of those are in sales, but there's a good 600-700 of those that are working in the warehouse to make sure that all those orders are fulfilled. And that's, even though that's warehousing, that's still retail and music related, I do think. So
I would add one more thing, because I learned a lot from doing rentals. So I was handling rentals and renting out equipment and gear. And you learn a lot when people call you up and they're like, "Hey man, so my wireless microphone isn't working. Oh, what's going on?" And then you're like, well, then you have to troubleshoot it over the phone, or worst case, you have to drive over there and fix it yourself. Oh man. And not every company does that, but yeah, rentals is another thing where you could just be renting gear out for people for their weekend party or something bigger.
Oh yeah.
And there is there's all the middle things. So there's the manufacturer that makes it, and then there's distributors that will if the manufacturer's big enough, they'll do the distribution for themselves, but a lot of smaller manufacturers will use a big distributor. And then there's wholesale, which is where the distributors are selling to the retailers.
Retailer. Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of jobs in between that, like middle sales, wholesales and stuff.
Yeah.
For both companies, both sides. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because your company, have you dealt with those? There's a whole bunch of people that are probably doing that, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a bunch of people that I can reach out directly to from different manufacturers that are there to answer questions that I might have. I've spoken directly with vice president of a particular audio company that makes a really high end console, and he's actually said if you get somebody asking about our consoles and you dig in, you qualify, and you find out they're really serious about this, don't hesitate to pull me into it. I want to be involved in these sales. He's like, we used to have our own salespeople, and they used to just sell themselves, but they moved away from that just because they wanted to get a retailer that was specialized in that. They wanted to work more on their R&D and worry less about their sales.
Yeah, because that's with any company, people don't realize how important sales are, and that's one of the things when during the pandemic, everybody was saying there's one job that has only increased, it never goes away, and it's sales. There's always a need for
sales.
Sales
and IT. Those are the only two things that are just going to keep going higher.
But yeah, sales, and even for me with having a studio, it's I realized there's sales. I have to have my assistant running sessions, and I have to be taking video to put on social media, and talking to people, emailing people, and responding to texts and messages and stuff, and communicating with them, and being the salesperson to kind of close the deal to get them to come and use the studio. Yeah, but it's like that with everything. So if you can outsource that to somebody else, but
absolutely.
The only other thing I'd like to add to retail is Namm. So a lot of people have heard about the Namm Show, which is the National Association of Music Merchants, and they're actually having it in person soon.
When?
Oh, nice.
In June. It's usually in January, but they're
That's
having
my
it in
busy
June.
season, jerks.
And it's nice because they do it right across the street from Disneyland. So, in Anaheim. So my wife's like, "Sure, let's go." We'll go to Namm.
Of course.
But Namm's cool
Namm,
because but you see there, if you go to Namm, you'll see all these kind of people. There are all these reps from the companies manning the booths and stuff, and it's just interesting to see all the different. You've got these companies that just make flutes, and then you've got these other companies that just make like shock mounts or something like that, and it's just like everything, and you realize how much there is, and the retail industry is like a huge, like the gross on that is like
there are
in the
so
billions.
many electric guitarists. There are so many guitarists out there that will buy any pedal and any amp just because they
Just
need
put a
it.
fancy color on it,
Yeah.
And then
Make it purple.
they'll return it 2 weeks later because it's not the right tone.
Or my favorite is like audio engineers, and I'm not calling out anybody's here, but I definitely know people who are just like, oh, new microphone. I need to try that. I need to try this new speaker out. I need this.
Just at me next time, Joe.
Yeah, I wasn't calling you out. I was actually thinking of somebody else. But you're not wrong.
Last one, education.
So why don't you guys
take it
start,
away, Professor?
Why-
Okay, yeah.
You guys can start, and then I'll
right,
correct
all right.
you because that's what
Okay. You've got within education, you've got like private instructors that take on students and will teach them either in like small groups or individually, one-on-one. Think of like like almost everybody's taken piano lessons at some point in their life, and that's like a private teacher usually. And then you can go up to like academic institutions where you're teaching at either a public school as a music teacher, or getting into secondary or higher education, and you're teaching some specific subject.
The interesting thing about that, though, is nowadays, especially for secondary education, so high school teachers and even middle school teachers are expected to also be recording engineers and live sound engineers.
Yo, but that is
yeah.
a thing.
It is. And
Yeah.
I get tons of people who come through my classes, and they're just like, oh, this doesn't have to do with what I'm doing because I'm music education, and it's not, and I only have to worry about playing instruments and stuff or singing. And then they get out there, and then they say, man, I wish I'd paid more attention in the tech classes. Or I'll get those people that like worked on the tech crew for me or something, and I ran into this guy at a music education conference, and he's like, I didn't know how much I would use my experience from working on the tech crew doing live sound. He's like, but I've used it tons.
Yeah.
It's teaching high school. So it's just like an expected thing that, oh, you're music, so you should know audio too.
And I definitely think, like, as far as education is concerned, I think a lot of band teachers are going to fall by the wayside. I think music will die in schools if people don't start to incorporate newer music and incorporate newer ensembles and newer types of engagement with music. Like, speaking from like a secondary or high school education and stuff like that, like, there are so many opportunities to instill a love of music for these kids that teachers are refusing to do because they don't want to delve into the music technology thing. I know for me, if I had that opportunity in high school to learn a DAW, I would be light years ahead of where I am today in all of the things that I do daily. If I had known that, I would never have been as big into video games as I was in high school. I just wouldn't have. I was obsessed with music.
Okay, so even last week, I just had somebody who came to observe one of my classes and one of my lessons that was a high school teacher that is trying to incorporate more technology-based audio engineering stuff.
My
and,
man.
Have a rock band, and have like teaching about DAWs and stuff. And so it's a big, huge push right now. I mean, if you think about, there's these little squares that everybody's supposed to fit into. Either you're an orchestral player, like you play strings, or you're a band player and you play woodwind or brass, or you're in choir and percussion or whatever. And it's like, if you don't really like or enjoy any of those, you're just not allowed to enjoy music. And so that's the push now, is that let's do more popular music stuff. There's a lot more rock bands popping up in schools and more classes. They've had guitar classes for years, but now they have like production classes like DAWs and stuff.
Even aside from like accredited institutions, there's also a bunch of nonprofit institutions that have come up in the last few years that are there specifically to give that kind of experience, because there was a hole within, academia. And so some people were like, hey, I'm going to create this nonprofit to focus on like rock music or focus on, this other kind of music.
Yeah. Like after school programs is what you're talking about.
Yeah. After school programs.
Yeah. They'll have like rock band. There's a bunch of those where they're,
we have like one like the School of Rock or something. I don't know. I don't know. It's like
there's a bunch like that. The School of Rock is actually national in the United States.
Oh,
it's like a franchise system, so you can create your own School of Rock thing in a different city or area.
Yeah, there's a School of Rock out here in Indiana that I've seen, and then there was one back home. I actually met some of the people that were teachers at that School of Rock.
Yeah,
that's cool. So like those are secondary education, but like when you get past that, and I've talked about this, we've kind of brought it up a little bit. We've talked about the negative stigma towards colleges that teach audio engineering, and I understand that. There's also like technical schools that teach it that are more hands-on approach, and then there's also certifications.
Yep.
And these are important educational things. Now, there are people who sell certifications. There are companies like Shure sells. I think they do like wireless workbench courses where they go through systems engineering for wireless and RF. There are also rigging schools.
Audinate does their Dante certification,
and not all of them cost. Like Dante's free, I think, up to level 3, which is all of them, I think.
I don't remember how much the last one is or if it costs, but I think you can do all of their trainings online free. I went through level 2.
Yeah,
free. And then you have a lot of the software companies. Like a lot of the DAWs will have certification programs.
Which they have, like I know with like Pro Tools
and Logic. Logic has a certification that you can get.
Cubase and
I think even some of the like pitch correction software like has like courses on auto-tune specifically, and you get like certified in like auto-tune, Melodyne, whatever.
Yeah. And some of those are to fill those jobs that we talked about. Like if you're a tuning engineer, you can be auto-tune certified or Melodyne certified.
Yeah.
And I'll say this: I think it's great to get certifications. I don't think you're never going to get turned down from a job because you have a certification. You might get turned down from a job if you don't have a certification, but it's unlikely they're going to pick you because you have a certification. But if they're comparing you to somebody else and you have a certification and that other person doesn't, they're more likely to go with you because you've gone through the footwork to achieve that thing.
But
you're looking at resumes.
The key thing here is the certifications are like a secondary part of what people are going to hire you for. They're going to mainly hire you for your experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like you can just have no experience and get the certification and expect to get the job. You have to have experience, and the certification is just to help you
achieve, like kind of distinguish yourself from another person. With that being said, you have certifications. You have also, like for mixing, there are a lot of people who offer private lessons or like mix reviews online. Now, it's not really like a certification, but it is education of sorts. And these are like award-winning engineers that are offering like mix reviews. I've never really done that. I kind of want to, but I also think I suck. So whatever.
There's like certain online resources to get education that are actually pretty good, and there's some really good resources on YouTube.
Linda, I think, is another one.
Linda's pretty good. If you're wanting to like specify particularly in like recording and stuff, urm.academy, the ultimate recording machine. I'm not like trying to like sponsor them or like get sponsored by them. But like I've taken, I have one of their courses and I've been really, really impressed by it. And I've learned a lot of stuff from it that I think is actually legit, and by somebody that has worked, with some big artists.
The nice thing about those is they're, especially in comparison to just randomly finding YouTube videos like this one, maybe. It is a little bit more qualified because they've set up a whole business and stuff.
And it's organized in like a logical flow.
Yeah, because that's one of the problems with a lot of the YouTube videos is they're not always organized logically, and then there's no fact checkers, because like you could say misinformation on your video and you're the editor too, So you, whereas these things, and I've done some of those. Like I worked for a competitor with lynda.com to do a lot of like training videos on Pro Tools and stuff. And they had the editors that would go through, and if there was something hinky about what I said, they would actually be like, you said this right here. Is that really true? Do you have facts to back that up?
Yo,
so
I would appreciate that. That'd be really nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that is the thing that's beneficial about these companies that are, I mean, granted, there are going to be those companies that are basically just doing YouTube videos and then selling it like a company thing.
Of course.
Yeah, but most of them, like you said, they have like seasoned people, and they're doing really good stuff.
Yeah.
So then there's the trade schools, like you mentioned.
Yeah, like Blackbird, Crass, and Full Sail kind of. Full Sail was that,
count?
But Full Sail's accredited now.
Yeah, okay. They keep on. They're still trade school-ish because they don't, like a lot of their programs don't require you to have all the general education sort of things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then there's another big one I can't remember. But yeah, that has
Los Angeles School of Recording or something.
Well, I know Berkeley does a lot of online courses, but they're a university college. I don't think they count. Yeah.
But yeah, so the trade schools, it's the whole idea that you can just take courses in your professional trade, That's the idea. Whereas college, it's designed to have like you have general education courses, and so you have to take biology. Everybody has to take biology, and everybody has to take English. So they have this basis knowledge level that is supposed to, the idea is to help teach you how to learn and to give you like a base of knowledge that's a common core, kind of common base of knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of those trade schools are good, but a lot of them, the fallacy of them is that like they don't do that good of placement, and they're really expensive, and so you're paying for a lot of fancy equipment and for this certification that is just like, sometimes it's just like the certification we just spoke of, like with the DAW certification.
Yeah.
Where it's not really saying that you're going to get the job because you have that certification. It's still about the experience. So that's the thing with the trade schools that are tough.
I'll also add this too. Having talked to a lot of the people, at least in the live sound industry, and probably in the studio industry, those kinds of, and I mean, this is kind of like not really, this is kind of outside of the scope of like what careers are out there, but like with some of those education, if you're looking for jobs, those kinds of certificates, those kinds of graduation degrees or whatever, don't speak much to people who work professionally day in and day out. And the real reason why is not because those schools are failures, and this is totally another scope and topic. And the simple answer is it's because real world experience, doing that 40 hours or 90 hours a week like some of these people are doing, teaches you so much. A year of that experience makes a bigger difference. And I say that, and Ben, I think you can corroborate this, because you look at me compared to a lot of my other like compatriots at college. I had worked a year professionally, and then there was like not really much of a competition between me and other people, really. And I'm not saying that because I'm amazing, because I'm not. I'm saying that because like you need to realize this if you ever get education, that it doesn't translate the same way that you might think it does. Like for other college degrees or for other like certificates or degrees or other things like that, it doesn't translate the same. And that's a whole nother topic. And that's all I'm going to say on that. Let's move on.
I know there's so much I'd like to. Yeah. Yes, I will corroborate that. And along with that, like I think that both of you have experienced, that I've brought up, is the grind. That and I realized I was talking about like having to work, but it's not really just work. It's the grind of like you're just like doing the same thing day in and day out again and again. It's not that like, oh, you never experienced work before. It's like you had to work hard in school, to get things done. But the grind of the day-to-day grind is something that takes some getting used to after you get out of college or you start your career and you're like, oh, this sucks sometimes,
Like live sound, it's not uncommon to work 3 to 4 16-hour days or more. Sometimes you'll work 21 straight days, and you'll be like pulling 16 to 20-hour days. Yes, I'm not kidding. 16 to 20-hour days for some shows. And then you'll get off, and then you're off for like a month. And like, what do you do during that time? Do you do more
sleep.
audio? You sleep for like the month, Then you go to another like festival or whatever. Anyways, Bryant, you were saying something.
Yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, like kind of along those lines, like I had a friend that he made the majority of his money from, throughout the year. He'd make, 50, 60K a year, but most of that was from the months of, really
like May to like
April,
September.
April-ish, to September, and then it tapers off, and then is really, really big in December, for Christmas events
and New Year's,
and New Year's, and then the rest of January through March, he's not really doing much, but he works a lot when he's working, but then when he's not, it's like there's the dry spells throughout the year.
Yeah,
and sometimes it's nice to pick up some of these other things,
Yeah.
Which just like teaching education, you teach for 9 months and then you're off for 3. And so.
And then you work live sound during those 3 months.
Yeah, that's what I do. I know it's funny because people complain about how teachers don't make that much and stuff. And you can argue that and stuff. But when you think about it, they're getting paid that amount for 9 months.
Right.
Not everybody else is getting paid that amount. You look at it like, oh, that's their annual salary. No, that's for somebody else that would work 12 months. Yeah, that's kind of light. But they're only working 75% of that time.
Right.
And then the other 25%, they're not working, or they have the chance to work something else and make extra money.
Right.
And so it's like, no, teachers aren't, it's not that bad of income, because if you look at it that way, it's like, oh, I get 3 months off. And so I can say I can take less money, or I get 3 months off so I can do some other work and make more money. And I've known people that, work construction every year when they were high school teachers or something. And like Joe said, I do a bunch of live sound during the summer. It works out nicely because then when school's out, live sound is big, studio work and stuff you can do all year round. So that brings us to the college and universities programs. Now, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, it is totally changed. When I first started doing this, first of all, nobody wanted to hire anybody with a college degree in anything related to audio. They all just wanted somebody to come in and make coffee and clean up vomit and go run and get pizza and score drugs for the studio, and then they would work their way up. And then they learn how to do it. And then if somebody got in a car accident, they could step in and run the console. And that's seriously like the success story of like
car accidents?
All like
all
the
the big name. Yeah, all the A-listers, that is their story. It's like in some variation of that. It's like their story. And so all those people like look at the upcomers and they're just like, well, I had to do all this crap. Why don't you? And so they're like, you don't need, if you have a degree, you're not willing to do this and stuff. So anyways, over time, it's gotten more popular, and there's more and more college programs that will have some kind of degree in audio production. And so now it's like, and for a while there, it was like, oh, that's great. You got a degree. You know how to do it. Now we expect you to have a degree, but you still have to start making coffee.
You still have to intern and get coffee and go get your cables and all. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's still not, it's still kind of that way right now. So you still have to be, it's like the extension of your education is like, you have to pay to work for a while after.
The thing is, I will say this though, as far as working in these career fields, the one thing that I think has translated well, regardless of where you have learned from, regardless of where you have started from, is hard work. 100% of the time, no one is going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, that new guy, he works really hard, but nah. Like unless you're a real, complete, utter jerk, and if you work hard, you will get opportunities, and they will give you those things. The reason I stayed at the jobs that I stayed at was because when push came to shove, I was still there pushing carts. I was still there pushing, trunks and cables and wrapping cables. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and I had proved myself that way. I even had a friend, I had a friend of mine who said this, and I was really proud of this because he's a tough guy. Like, he's the kind of person that if he doesn't like you, he's going to punch you in the face and he'll tell you about it. Good guy, though. But he, one day, I was, I was taking in some, plates from truss plates, and he's like, I had them over my head because it was easier. It like locked my elbows out, and I didn't have to deal with the actual weight. And he's like, "That's some real man crap right there." He said other colorful words. He's like, "That's some real man shit right there." No, but and I was just sitting there, and the reason why he said that was because he had 4 new crew members on his crew, and he had told me earlier that day, he's like, "We don't ever have to fire people because if they're not pulling their weight, they'll just quit because the guys on the crew don't want to deal with that, and no one on this crew wants to deal with that. So hard work translates to opportunities, but realize that those opportunities, again, hard work is always rewarded with more work."
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
So just be aware of that as you get these jobs and stuff. Like, you'll start out maybe winding cables and getting people's coffee, but after a while, they'll throw you in there, and not necessarily just throw you in. Sometimes they'll actually mentor you into these positions and train you. And, it's like, this is a low-tier gig. We'll give the new kid a shot. Or, hey, let's train the new kid on this to take over for so-and-so. So. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the companies that I've worked for. It's a live sound company. That's kind of what they do. There's kind of like a, low stress gig that they have. And they'll just have one guy, basically mentor, and then we'll like, hey, yeah, let's have you do front of house and monitors together. Have you ever used this console before? And you're looking at like a Yamaha QL5, and you're like, no. And then they're like, okay, well, yep,
best to figure it out.
Yeah, you're gonna learn today, and here's some tips for you. If you want to like add some effects, here's how you do that. If you want to like route this, here's how you do that. And it's like, okay, cool.
Man, that sounds nice. Like my gigs, it was always like, hey, by the way, you're running lights. I was like, I've never ran lights before. Yeah, we don't care. Figure it out. Okay, I guess I'm running lights, or I guess I'm learning a board.
Yeah, that was a different company, but I did that same thing too. Hey, you're running lights today. Cool. How do I do that? Figure it out.
You start Googling the manual on your phone.
Yeah. But I think Joe, you wound it up nicely. It is about work and dedication, and any of these careers are possible. You just have to be dedicated to it, and you have to do the work, and you're going to run into the grind, and it's like, that's how they, the people that fall off when they hit that, they're like, okay, go get a different career then, but if you stick through it, then those opportunities will come.
I'll add one more bit of advice for that to do with the grind. Find something that is not your job that you enjoy, that takes your mind off of your job, because there are people who will just sputter their wheels, always working from gig to gig to gig. And as much as you think that might make you a better person and a better engineer, that doesn't. Having only focus in one area, as much as that seems to be like a thing, is what most likely causes burnout and drives people out of this industry, out of any industry really. So like that's why I've picked up electric guitar. That's a me thing. I don't play it because it's my job. I play it because I have a lot of skills from audio that I can then use to maximize my playing and stuff. It's for me. Yeah. It's not for anyone else.
Yeah. You have to balance. I mean, I picked up cooking because of it, to have as my wife would call it, the non-musical hobby.
For the record, he makes great bacon and eggs, and he knows the secrets of popcorn. Ben does.
I do.
After gig popcorn movie.
I think that's a good way to wrap up this week's episode.
Yeah. All right. I guess.
After gig popcorn movie.
Oh, right. And this is GWNL. I am Joe.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Bryant.
Mix less than bad.
Mix good.
Mix good.